everyone, welcome back to their hardware news recap of the week. In this one, we talk about Intel Battlemage. It's in the rumor mill again, this time with a B580 listed and showing up. That's the Battlemage 580. They're doing something different from the other vendors, keeping the number, changing a letter. So that'll be new and exciting from the normal numbering quandary we run into once they run out of numbers because they stop at 10. Additionally, we'll be going over Intel entering a bit of a spiral, and not a good one. It is selling some of its property and looking at a potential partial leaseback of that property. In other news, the 40 series will be in limited supply. This is something NVIDIA has officially disclosed in one of its earnings calls. In rumors, there's several 50 series GPUs emerging on the rumor mill, which is clearly related to this, and an SSD that's 122 terabytes for capacity. Let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by Lian Li and the O11D Evo RGB case. The O11D Evo RGB is an updated entry to the famed O11 lineup, retaining heavy support for fan mounts, drive mount locations, and flexibility on component mounting, such as two options for the power supply. The O11D Evo RGB's dual chamber approach aims to maximize cable storage on the backside to streamline cable management, coupling this with a unique vertical GPU mount to showcase the most expensive part in most systems. Learn more at the link in the description below. First up, ASRock did a task that's normally reserved for MSI, leaking everything that its partners are planning except way in advance. Via Reddit, the company's now removed Amazon listings for a B580, which would be in the Battlemage series, depicted a 12GB GDDR6 19 gigabit per second solution with a 192-bit bus width, assuming you can trust these details in the title. The reason for the uncertainty there is that the listing also said 650 watts, which is definitely not going to be the power draw as indicated by the power connectors, and is more likely the recommended power supply or something like that for a system using this card. The card is shown with varying counts of 8 pins, typically 1 or 2. It depends on which model you look at. Intel's 580 series debuted with the A580, which was a relatively late arrival in the Alchemist lineup, kind of a weird one too. Intel's strongest offering for Alchemist, we thought, was the A750, which benefited from competitive pricing at various points in its midlife cycle. And the A770 technically is more capable, just wasn't as good of a deal most of the time. For now, that leak is really all we have for the Battlemage GPUs. It's more of a proof of life than anything at this point. This coincides with previous leaks we covered in the last episode that Battlemage may launch this year. The window is getting really narrow for that, so we'll see how that shakes out. But it's rapidly closing. If it comes out this year, then that would put Intel ahead of NVIDIA and AMD, both of which have GPUs that are rumored to be coming out in the first quarter of next year. All right, next up, Intel, again, in the news. This time, it is hard news, not just a rumor. So Intel is in troubling times. It's evaluating options for a sale and potentially a partial leaseback of one of its office properties. And the Oregonian, which frequently gets early news scoops on Intel due to its local presence to several of Intel's campuses, is reporting this story. They noted that Intel is planning to begin selling some of its physical real estate. Over the years, large tech companies, including AMD, have used a sell and lease back method to generate quick cash flow by extracting equity from property and using it to resolve short-term liquidity or cash flow problems. Depending on the size of the property, this can generate hundreds of millions of dollars in short order. The Oregonian notes that Intel is planning, quote, to sell its 150-acre campus in Folsom, California. It also says that Intel is, quote, also evaluating the future of its 50-acre Hawthorne Farm property, which is in Oregon. Intel's Explore Intel website shows that Hawthorne Farm is one of 4 campuses relatively near each other. The others are named Aloha, Jones Farm, and Ronler Acres. Intel's website states that Hawthorne Farm is its second Oregon campus, opened in 1981, although we found some news reports that suggested earlier operation in the late 70s. And the company declares that Hawthorne Farm is home to labs, motherboard R&D, and office space. Now, if Intel sells some of these properties, it's possible that it plans to lease back some of the land, and actually they said as much for the Folsom campus. It's also possible that they don't need to lease back all of it, because with 15,000 to 20,000 departures recently from a mix of layoffs and voluntary separation with the company, aka, we'll give you money, please go away now. It's a common corporate tactic. The phrasing's a little different though. With those cutbacks though, Intel might not need all of its campuses and may be able to consolidate. Local publication the Hillsborough Herald reports, seemingly via Mike Rogaway, that the Hawthorne Farm site is home to only a few hundred employees. While researching for this story, we found a 2022 report published by the Hillsborough Herald that helps shed some light on the localized impact of facilities like Intel's. It said this, quote, "Those of you from Hillsborough who remember what Hawthorne Farms, Jones Farm, and Ronler Acres looked like before Intel came will see a familiar pattern unfolding in Ohio. The company buys massive amounts of land, spends massive amounts of money, and employs a lot of people. The results include rising home prices, billions in economic expansion, and wealth accumulation, along with traffic, power, water, and other environmental challenges," end quote. Likewise, Intel departing an area or cutting jobs would have a similar but maybe opposite effect on the same types of things like the local economy, depending on the scale of its departure or cut down. Of its plan to sell the 150-acre California campus, CBS News reports that Intel stated this, quote, "We're shifting our global real estate strategy to focus on fewer, more populated locations and eliminate underutilized space. The approach will foster greater in-person collaboration at our largest sites while also delivering cost savings for the company. We're exploring more cost-effective space usage options for Intel's Folsom site, including a partial leaseback of our current space." CBS reported that the company is cutting an additional 300 jobs at Folsom this month. A partial leaseback would mean Intel might not want all the lab or office space or whatever. There could be some benefits here too, like if they're adopting more work from home or whatever, they don't need all the space anyway. One of the interesting side effects of this is that it does affect company culture and sort of morale overall, where some of these sites where you're now sharing a space with a different company, it does create this sort of ever-present thought in your mind of, can I really just speak openly about the projects here? Or is that a potential NDA problem because I don't know who's next to me and what they maybe shouldn't know about the thing I'm working on? So anyway, next up, Threadripper in the rumor mill. This one's pretty quick and simple. So Twitter leaker Allrack29_, the underscore is important, has posted what appears to be an import record with harmonized system code records of several AMD CPUs dated for end of October. We know it's legit because it's Allrack29_, not Allrack29- or Allrack29*, not even Allrack29'. But the underscore denotes a certain prestige. The record that he leaked includes listings for desktop Ryzen parts, including Threadripper CPUs with an apparent 350-watt TDP. These seem to span the usual range up to 96 cores and down to 16 cores. That's really it for that leak. There's not much more to it. It does not indicate when the parts will actually be on sale. If they are being imported already, though, which this maybe does suggest, and considering we have no formal news or embargoes yet, that would put these into next year sometime. We'd assume AMD, the rumor already is that AMD has a ton of announcements for CES. We'd assume they'd talk about it then if they're going to talk about it. So that'd be sometime in January. Not much to this story, so let's move on. Next one. During a Q3 earnings call that is reported on by Tom's Hardware, NVIDIA's CFO suggested that 40 series RTX GPUs might be hard to come by this quarter, stating, quote, "Gaming, although sell-through was strong in Q3, we expect fourth quarter revenue to decline sequentially due to supply constraints," end quote. In addition to making it harder to find an NVIDIA GPU this holiday season, it's also possible that the limited availability of these cards may raise the pricing of existing 40 series GPUs. During the call, NVIDIA CFO Kress stated, quote, "Our gaming supply, given what we saw selling through, was moving quite fast. Now the challenge that we have is, how fast could we get that supply getting ready into the market for this quarter? Not to worry, I think we'll be back on track with more supply as we turn the corner into the new calendar year," end quote. These supply constraints are likely due to NVIDIA winding down the production in 40 series cards in favor of ramping up production on the 50 series GPUs, which are rumored to show at CES in January. NVIDIA CFO also stated this, quote, "Q3 was a great quarter for gaming with notebook, console, and desktop revenue all growing sequentially and year on year," end quote. During the call, it was revealed that NVIDIA's gaming division generated $3.2 billion in revenue, which is a 15% increase from the year prior. Speaking of 50 series cards, there's some more rumors on them this week. We'll just compile a bunch of them into this one story. So we'll start with release dates. Benchlife.info reports that the 5090, 5090D, or Dragon for the China market, 5080, 5070 Ti, and 5070 will all release during Q1 of 2025. The only two cards that were mentioned but don't have release dates include the 5060 Ti and the 5060, although Bench Life reports that those cards are expected to launch before April. Meanwhile, Video Cards reports that the 5070 Ti will use the GB203-300 GPU and will offer 8960 CUDA cores, which would be a 16.6% increase compared to the 4070 Ti 7680. Now, depending on architectural changes, NVIDIA CUDA core counts can't necessarily be taken like for like, since changes could non-linearly impact the performance due to architectural shifts. Bench Life reports that the 5070 Ti will be a 350-watt TGP card, and Video Cards notes that it will offer 16 gigabytes of GDDR7 VRAM. Moving on to the 5070, Video Cards reports that the card will use GB205 and will offer 6400 CUDA cores, which represents an 8.7% uplift over the 4070's 5888 CUDA cores. Like the 4070, the card will reportedly also have 12 gigabytes of VRAM, but will move from GDDR6X to GDDR7. The publication also notes that it will be a 250-watt TDP card. Finally, Mega Size GPU tweeted the supposed die size of GB202. You know you can trust Mega Size GPU because the name matches the size of the report. The rumored 5090 die is measured at 24 by 31, according to the hardware leaker. This would be 744 millimeters squared, which is larger than the 4090's AD102 GPU, which measures at 608 millimeters squared. That's a huge die size, and that'll bear with it some difficulties in manufacturing, assuming NVIDIA doesn't follow its Blackwell approach for server of splitting the die in two. Up next, there was some news a couple weeks ago about TSMC's allowances to produce cutting-edge silicon, namely right now, 2nm class, abroad. According to the Taipei Times, Taiwan Minister of Economic Affairs J.W. Kuo stated, quote, Taiwan's technology protection rules prohibit Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co., TSMC, or Taiji Dian, from producing 2nm chips abroad. So the company must keep its most cutting-edge technology at home, end quote. TSMC is currently in pre-production of 2nm chips, which are expected to launch in 2025. The publication goes on to note, quote, Taiwanese law limits domestic chip makers to producing chips abroad that are at least one generation less advanced than their fabs at home, end quote. This would impact TSMC's fabs in the US, of which the company has 1 in Washington State and 3 in various stages of production and build-out in Arizona. Kuo went on to say, quote, although TSMC plans to make 2nm chips abroad in the future, its core technology will stay in Taiwan, end quote. On this note, the company's second Arizona fab is geared to produce 3 and 2nm chips when it opens in 2028. This is mostly just interesting because it paints the sort of broader picture of how these different regions are vying for manufacturing prowess and capabilities to be kept at home as much as possible. The US has the CHIPS Act going on and is trying to establish more on-soil manufacturing and production. And then Taiwan, of course, recognizes the value of its homemade silicon and what that brings. Up next, speaking of vying for power, Microsoft. Can't have enough of it. And also ZeniMax. Hundreds of ZeniMax employees representing the largest video game union recently went on a one-day strike. The ZeniMax Workers United-CWA represents more than 300 QA employees and is the first game developer union at Microsoft. IGN, which is 50% better than us by letter count alone, reports that the strike occurred, quote, for an alleged lack of progress at the bargaining table over remote work and for allegedly unilaterally outsourcing quality assurance work without bargaining with the union, end quote. The publication also adds, quote, last month, Communications Workers of America Union, or CWA, filed an unfair labor practice charge against ZeniMax for contracting out work without notification. ZeniMax Workers United, CWA members, have raised concerns that ZeniMax's recent unilateral decision to outsource quality assurance work threatens job security amid record layoffs across the video game industry, end quote. Now, these layoffs include more than 2,500 employees across Microsoft's gaming divisions and includes the closures of 3 ZeniMax studios, Arcane Austin, Tango Gameworks, and Alpha Dog Games. ZeniMax has a long history. It was founded in 1999 and became the parent of Bethesda Softworks. ZeniMax has an interesting history for a video game publisher, not necessarily something you'd expect here. The company's original board, according to Wikipedia, featured the MGM chairman, that MGM, Harry Sloan, CBS CEO Leslie Moons, and Robert Trump, of the same family you're thinking. ZeniMax was purchased by Microsoft in 2020 for $7.5 billion, including subsidiaries like Bethesda, which of course you all likely know from the Elder Scrolls series. ZeniMax is now composed of studios that include id Software, Machine Games, Arcane Lion, and Bethesda. News of the strike comes hot off the heels of Xbox head Phil Spencer telling Bloomberg that, quote, the Xbox business has never been more healthy. Despite the strike and layoffs, Spencer stated that Microsoft is still interested in acquiring more studios, even though it just got done shutting a bunch of them down, telling Bloomberg, quote, we definitely want to be in the market, and when we can find teams and technology and capability that add to what we're trying to lay off, sorry, I misread that, what we're trying to do in gaming at Microsoft, absolutely, we will keep our heads up. Now, we obtained exclusive footage of Phil Spencer's latest acquisition where he personally went into a studio to consult and see what could be done. Here's the clip.
What would you say you do here?
Which, of course, was answered with, I take the spec from the customer to the engineers. Up next, Solidigm, based in California, has announced a massive 122.88 terabyte SSD, which goes by the name of D5-P5336, which sounds like the name of a Terminator SKU or something. The 5336 surpasses the storage capacity of Nimbus Data's 100 terabyte drive. The SSD's tech is based on QLC NAND, or quad level cell, and the drive represents Solidigm's 4th generation QLC NAND-based SSDs. On its website, the company writes, quote, the D5-P5336 SSD embodies high-density innovation at its core. Every design aspect was meticulously optimized to achieve the highest storage density with minimal footprint, both in size and power consumption, end quote. While the drive's biggest draw is its storage capacity, it also doesn't sound like a slouch in the performance department, given the company advertising sequential read up to 7,400 megabytes per second and random read speeds capable of 930,000 IOPS. According to Hot Hardware, Solidigm is currently providing samples to customers in the U.2 form factor, which will be available in first quarter of 2025, with the E1.L 9.5mm form factor scheduled to be available in second quarter. They haven't released pricing yet, as far as we can tell, because if you're not a data center, go away. But if you're some type of data hoarder extraordinaire with lots and lots of money, I don't know, email them or something and ask for B2B pricing for your problems. You don't need to keep everything. Up next, Intel has been queued up to receive $8.5 billion from the CHIPS Act for a while now. The CHIPS Act is from the federal government in the US, and it's an authorization of funding for various companies to build silicon fabrication plants in the US. Now, the news here is Intel is now queued up to receive $8.0 billion. The $500 million extra was taken away, allegedly. Via the New York Times, which is paywalled, CNBC reports that the New York Times reports that Intel has reportedly lost $500 million in what was previously supposed to be $8.5 billion of funding from the federal government. In recent months, Intel has vocally decried the government for its slow release of funds. The New York Times cites people familiar with the matter. So as of filming this segment, the news is not official. A $500 million reduction would obviously be a substantial sort of penalty, if you want to look at it that way, or punishment. The cited reasoning is due to delays in fab construction planning for Ohio facilities. TSMC recently received $6.6 billion of total grants. It's got others lined up, as we understand it too, for US-based fabs built right down the road from some of Intel's. There's not any more to that story. It's pretty cut and dry, but obviously if it develops into some official news, we'll cover it in the next one. Next up, there's a new rumor from Bloomberg, also behind a paywall, that Polygon picked up. The rumor suggests that Sony is working on a handheld gaming device. Although some initial coverage cites the Switch as the obvious comparison, we think it's more likely a play at both Microsoft's inbound Xbox handheld, which has now officially been confirmed by Phil Spencer, and the Steam Deck or Ally series of handhelds. Sony and Microsoft have had plenty of time to respond to the 2017 Switch if they had wanted to, so we think it's more likely the new rumblings that have spurred this. This would be different from the existing PlayStation Portal as well. It's supposed to be an actual full-on handheld gaming console, system, whatever you want to call it. There's no news beyond the rumor that Sony's working on such a device, So we'll keep it short, cut the fluff, and move on. Finally, another really short rumor to round out this week. This one's on the 9000 series X3D parts from AMD. This is coming in via video cards, which is reporting via a leaker. So Huan and Fu reported that a 9950X3D and 9900X3D will arrive in, quote, late January. The rocket ship emoji must mean something. We'll send a team to investigate. There's absolutely no further news on that rumor. That is the entirety of the rumor. So this date coincides with what other leakers have shared, alongside knowledge of AMD's plans for a big CES in January. We've also heard that AMD is planning a major rework of its implementation of the dual CCD parts, where one has X3D and one does not. Where historically this has been problematic for scheduling. It's required a lot of special steps to really make sure you nail the setup. So if they can improve on that, it would help with the usability and really the key criticism of the existing parts. So nothing official yet, but that's it for news this week. As always, thank you for watching. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you want to grab one of our PC building mod mats, if you have a PC build project coming up, our soldering mats, if you do soldering or just things like model assembly and painting, or our dice sets on the store, which are brand new and were added within the last month or so now. Really popular so far, so thank you to everyone who's bought them. So head over to store.gamersnexus.net for that and to support our work. And check back for more. We have a really big story coming up this week. I can't say what it is yet, but it is an investigation, so get ready for that. Check back for that, and we'll see you all next time.